Hello and welcome back to FATBOSS TV. Today we're having a look at another boss from the Tomb of Sargeras. We're looking at the Fallen Avatar from the 7.2 PTR.
So this two-phase encounter is the penultimate fight in the Tomb of Sargeras, and is probably one of the more solid bosses we've tested so far. The fight is all about prolonging phase 1 as long as possible, dealing as much damage to the boss before phase 2 begins, because phase 2 is a race against time as the boss slowly destroys the ground that you're stood on until there is nothing left, forcing you to swim in deadly lava which wipes you pretty quick.
Now just as a reminder, this is footage from the PTR, so things may change before the boss reaches live servers, although they usually don't change that much. Either way, do expect a full guide once the raid is released.
With that out of the way, let's kick straight into it and let's talk about phase 1. So the most important thing in this phase is to manage the boss's energy. Once he reaches 100% energy, he'll transition into phase 2. Now the boss will slowly gain energy over time, and that's something that you simply cannot prevent. However, he'll gain a large amount of energy when the boss spawns a containment pylon. Now these pylons will spawn and activate in one of the 5 locations that you see on screen now, and then will begin to shoot a beam towards the boss. A full channel of this beam will very quickly get the boss to 100% energy, which of course will transition you into phase 2. However, you can block this beam by tanking the Maiden of Valor within it. Now while inside this beam, the Maiden of Valor will gain energy instead. She'll also gain a stacking damage increase, but this didn't really seem to be too important while we were testing because she doesn't hit very hard as it is. However, as she's gaining energy and once she reaches 100%, she'll gain a gigantic absorption shield on herself and begin to cast Cleansing Protocol, and this is important. If the cast completes, it'll instantly kill your entire raid. However, if you manage to break the absorption shield, it'll interrupt her and remove 25% of her maximum health. So the moment that she reaches full energy, you'll need as a minimum at least your range DPS to swap and break the shield so that the cast is interrupted. And because she deals damage to herself afterwards, you need to make sure that you watch your damage on her when the shield is not active. If you do more than 25% of her health in just normal damage while the shield isn't active, you're just going to reduce the amount of time that you have in this phase because you'll only be able to do 3 shields rather than 4.
So providing you played it right, you'll see the shield 4 times and then she'll kill herself, and shortly afterwards phase 2 will begin. And to note, for the people thinking of a strategy that involves not killing her and instead forcing the boss to transition earlier than you otherwise usually would, if the Maiden is active when the boss transitions, he'll kill her and eat all of her health, just gaining a shit ton of his health back, so it's simply not worth it. You must make sure that she dies before you transition. But otherwise, that's the only role that the Maiden plays in the fight. You just need to have one tank make sure that you drag her into the energy beam so the boss doesn't absorb that energy, and you just got to make sure that you destroy her shield when she gains it. Otherwise, don't touch her and just focus on killing the boss. Let's move on and talk about everything else that's going on in this phase. Now for your tanks, the boss will hit them with a cast called Desolate. This ability does a huge amount of physical damage and applies a debuff, and this stacking debuff just simply increases the amount of damage you take from the ability by 75% per stack. So generally speaking, you want to taunt on 2 and then just swap jobs, so one tank will be taking the boss and one tank will just be dragging the Maiden around. For the raid to deal with, it's the purple Touch of Sargeras circles. On a long cast, these will spawn in seemingly random areas of the room. After 8 seconds, these circles will erupt and deal lethal shadow damage to the entire raid. However, if players stand within them, they'll split the damage and soak them instead. On normal and heroic, 2 people will be just enough, but it'll be risky, and obviously it does depend on your gear. Ultimately, 3 or more people per circle appears to be the safest option. Also, to help free people up, you can just solo soak them instead using immunities. Now to help make sure that we soak every single one of these circles, we decided to have our raid spread evenly across the room. That way, no matter where the Tomb of Sargeras circles spawn, there's always likely to have at least a couple people nearby that can quickly jump in it to make sure that nobody takes the raid-wide damage. Also for the raid to watch out for on a timer is Unbound Chaos. When this is cast, this causes all players to take a small amount of ticking damage, but also to spawn green circles underneath themselves. These green circles will explode after a second or so, dealing a burst of damage to anyone who stands within them, so you just simply need to make sure you avoid the circles that you spawn as well as the circles that other players spawn, otherwise your healers are going to be pissed because you're taking unnecessary damage. To add, everyone needs to also watch out for shadowy blades. Various blades will spawn near the boss and fixate on random players, shown by a beam. A few seconds later, the blades will fire out towards the players, dealing damage to anyone en route, as well as the fixated player. Once it has reached the player, it will also spawn a large purple puddle. This deals ticking damage and slows by 50%. So we had the fixated players move towards the edges of the room, whilst everyone watched out for the direction of the blades. The beam seems to be only visible by the fixated player, so it highly relies on other players really focusing on what direction the blades are facing before they're shot out. And apart from this, the only other ability for everyone to deal with in this phase is Rupture Realities. This long cast deals a huge amount of damage to every player in the room, however the further away you are from the boss, the less damage you take. While testing, we found that being at least halfway across the room away from the boss will make the damage survivable, but ultimately you want to be as far away as possible. And after the damage has gone off, you need to make sure your tank rushes back towards the boss, because otherwise it's going to hit some poor melee DPS, or the boss will just start doing random bursts of AoE damage to the raid, which you don't want to deal with. So just make sure the tank gets back nice and quickly, and the phase kind of repeats from there, and that's honestly phase 1.
So in phase 1, it's all about just dealing with the mechanics individually, because they don't really overlap that much, while preventing the boss's energy from going up too fast, just to maximize your time in the phase so you can do as much damage to him as possible before you finally transition into phase 2 when inevitably the Maiden dies. Now phase 2 begins with the avatar shattering the floor, and your entire raid will drop down into a lava-filled room that fortunately has a large platform. The boss in Ragnarok style will now reveal his legs and begin to follow your tank. He will also lose all previous abilities apart from the Desolate, so the tanks still need to swap, and Rupture Realities. The moment the phase starts, the boss will begin to pulse high fire damage on your raid every 2 seconds with Sear, and this buff stacks whenever the fallen avatar is actually stood within the lava. Initially this isn't really an issue, however the boss will begin to destroy the platform. Every time he casts Rupture Realities in this phase, he'll also take away sections of the platform in a pattern underneath himself. Now each time we've tested this boss, it's actually removed different amounts, and ultimately we think it'll probably change again before it hits live servers. But as a gauge, in the most recent testing, when the boss casted this ability 5 times, we had absolutely no platform left. Before each cast, we would take the boss right into the corner of the platform and move him to the next corner for each cast until finally you've got a small little square right in the middle of the room. Once that has been destroyed, you've only got a few seconds before you either die to lava damage or to the ever increasing damage that you take from Sear, as the boss is going to be gaining more and more stacks. Now while dealing with this ticking damage and moving the boss all over the platform, there are 2 other abilities that you need to deal with. Black winds on a timer will come across the platform, coming from the outsides of the room. Getting hit by these winds causes you to take a burst of damage as well as receive an extremely nasty dart. You simply just gotta look around you as soon as they spawn and just plan your movement fast. There is already a lot to heal in this final phase, and getting caught is simply just gonna make your healer's job much harder. And finally is the Dark Marks. These 6-second debuffs are applied to multiple players and marks a circle around them. Once the debuff expires, that player will take a large amount of damage and will be knocked back, pretty much killing them. However, if additional players stand within the circle, the damage will actually be split. Much like the Touch of Sargeras circles in phase 1, 2 people will save you, 3 is safe. But again, you can solo it with either an immunity or a large damage reduction. And mechanically, that's all it is for this phase. So the early parts of this phase are pretty easy. You've got plenty of room, so it's easy to deal with the Dark Marks. You have plenty of room to move from the winds. But as the platform is slowly removed and you have less and less room, it becomes much more difficult. And this is why it's so important that you need to maximize the duration of phase 1 just to get as much damage on him as possible. Otherwise you're going to have to deal with later parts of phase 2, and once you get to the point where there's absolutely no platform left, well, you're just screwed. It becomes absolutely brutal. And that's the encounter. So what do we think of the fight?
Yeah, I do like this encounter. One thing that's really cool about it is that like the entire fight feels important. Some fights you kind of just go through the motions of like phase 1, it might be a bit easy, and then like the harder parts are like later on, so you're just going through the motions to get to that point.
Yep.
Whereas in this fight, you need to do the best you possibly can during phase 1. It makes it a lot more engaging, because you know if you don't do well enough in phase 1, phase 2 is going to be pretty much impossible, because the boss is just going to remove everything.
It's
and
kind of like
have no platform.
Elisand.
Somewhat, yeah. The better you do in phase 1, the better you do later on in the fight.
Yeah.
So there is a little bit like that. But the thing is that this boss's phase 2 is actually, you know, pretty hype. It's like as more and more of the platform gets destroyed, it actually feels like it's getting harder and harder. And quite a few bosses they've released recently, the bosses just kind of drop off at the end. Whereas this one goes out of a bang. There's just so much coming your way.
There's a climax there.
Yeah,
it isn't
exactly.
just like, oh, I got over the hardest part, now we can just chill.
Yeah.
There is the hardest part is right at the end, where it should be on a good fight. But with that all said, the fight isn't perfect.
No.
One very, very small thing is that the blades in phase 1 are a little bit irritating. While we were testing, sometimes you would get the beam on the targeted player to show that you were getting it, whereas other times it didn't show you at all.
Yeah.
And also the fact that other players can't see the beam. I mean, I guess maybe that's where the skill is in this fight, you know, being able to actually gauge where the blades are going. But I don't think their visuals aren't good enough to sort of show that. I
It
think
kind of
could
just needs to be more
improved.
readable sort of thing.
Yeah, for sure. Also, the Dark Marks in phase 2, I'm not a massive fan of.
Yeah.
It feels like, you know, they're just regurgitating Archimon Mythic.
Yeah, God.
Gonna get flashbacks of that shit. Not that I dislike the mechanic, but Yeah, I can see how it's maybe going to be a little bit rough, especially when there's like virtually no platform left.
I think that's
Most
maybe
players are going to have to just kill themselves, essentially.
Yeah, I think that's maybe like some part of it to make it more and more difficult. Like the platform being removed is kind of, you know, like, oh, it's scary because the dark marks are going to maybe knock us into the lava. But yeah, I feel that the mechanic, similar to you, it's just going to be trivialized by like add-ons or immunity-based comps.
Immunity comps will destroy
Which
it.
kind of makes me think maybe it's better off maybe not having that particular mechanic, maybe having something else that fulfills a similar job of like a big knockback to make it so the fire's more scary. Maybe like, I don't know.
Maybe the winds could knock back.
Yeah, or something like that. You know, I just don't like that sort of mechanic where it's just going to be like an add-on's going to say, go to group 1, and you just stack on group 1, or it just automatically assign you. That will happen. That'll be in DBM like within a week of this boss coming out, if it's not already there or like now. So, I don't know, it feels like the mechanic doesn't really fit within the fight. But overall, I do like the fight. I think it's really, really cool.
It's definitely a good encounter. Phase 1, there's a lot of hard-hitting mechanics, of course. There's a lot of things that will one-shot you, so you do actually need to know what the mechanics are, and you do need to play in such a way so you can actually deal with them. And it doesn't feel all that boring in phase 1.
No.
It's quite a long phase, maybe, the phase 1. And then, of course, phase 2 is just nuts. There's all this shit going on, and you can see the platform slowly getting reduced, and it becomes incredibly tense, especially on that final little square right in the middle. Hopefully they keep that, but we'll see. But thank you very much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this preview, then please do drop down a like. It helps us out a lot. And before we do go, we'd like to give a huge shout out to all of our supporters over on Patreon. If you wish to join these fantastic group of people, the link for that is in the description. We appreciate all the support you guys give us, and we shall see you all in the next video.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.